Ethan Cole stood beneath the golden chandelier of the Grand Meridian, holding his daughter's small hand while the receptionist looked him up and down with open contempt. His faded blue shirt, inexpensive trousers, and worn leather shoes apparently convinced her that he had no business entering the marble lobby. What she could not know was that Ethan was the owner of the entire hotel, a man who had quietly built a fortune after years of struggle. He had arrived unannounced to inspect his property with Mia, hoping to spend a peaceful afternoon together. He was about to discover the truth. The receptionist named Valerie glanced at the reservation screen and then at Ethan again, clearly irritated. Ethan calmly explained that he needed a room for himself and his daughter, but Valerie insisted that every suitable room was unavailable. When Ethan mentioned that he owned the hotel, she laughed, assuming he was making an absurd joke. Two security guards approached after Valerie complained about a suspicious man refusing to leave. Mia squeezed her father's hand, frightened by the sudden attention. Ethan remained calm, telling her everything would be fine. He had learned long ago that dignity mattered more than anger itself. Ethan had never cared about expensive clothes or dramatic displays of wealth. He remembered sleeping in a cramped apartment after his wife, Lauren, left him and took most of their savings. During those difficult years, he worked several jobs while raising Mia, refusing to let his daughter see how scared he sometimes felt. Eventually, his small hospitality company grew into a national brand, and the Grand Meridian became his proudest acquisition. Yet success had not changed the man inside him. He still carried the same wallet, drove an ordinary car, and believed employees deserved respect regardless of position, clothing, wealth, or bank account, because character mattered to him. Valerie demanded identification, and Ethan handed over his driver's license without hesitation. She studied it, then whispered something to the security guards. Instead of checking the ownership records, they escorted Ethan and Mia toward the entrance. Guests stared as the little girl tried not to cry. Ethan noticed an elderly housekeeper watching from across the lobby, her expression filled with shame. She recognized him immediately, because Ethan had once personally thanked her for helping during a difficult staff shortage. She wanted to speak, but fear kept her silent. Ethan looked at her gently, asking her to remain calm and patient. Outside the hotel, Ethan crouched beside Mia and wiped the tears from her cheeks. He told her that sometimes people judge others by appearances because they have forgotten how valuable kindness can be. Mia asked why her father did not simply tell everyone that he owned the building. Ethan smiled sadly and explained that revealing his identity would only hide the real problem. He needed to know whether the hotel treated ordinary guests the same way. Mia understood more than he expected. She had watched her father struggle before, and she knew victories were never about money, possessions, or recognition. Ethan called his personal assistant, Marcus, and asked him to review the hotel's current management records immediately. Within minutes, Marcus discovered several troubling complaints that had been quietly buried. Guests without luxury clothing had reportedly received inferior service, maintenance workers had been threatened with termination for questioning supervisors, and housekeeping staff had complained about managers humiliating them publicly. Ethan felt a cold disappointment rather than surprise. The receptionist's behavior was not an isolated mistake. It was evidence of a culture that had been growing beneath the polished surface. He would return before afternoon ended, but this time he would arrive. At 2 o'clock, Ethan walked back through the hotel doors wearing the same clothes. This time, Marcus followed him with 2 members of the ownership board. Valerie immediately recognized him and froze. The general manager, Richard Hale, hurried across the lobby, trying to understand why senior executives had suddenly arrived. Ethan asked him to gather every department head in the main conference room. Richard nervously agreed, still unaware of what Ethan had discovered. Mia remained with a trusted staff member nearby. Ethan entered the conference room carrying no paperwork, no luxury briefcase, and no visible anger. Everyone there grew uncomfortable. Once everyone gathered, Ethan placed his hotel ownership documents on the table. Richard stared at them, then looked at Valerie, whose face had become completely pale. Ethan explained that he had visited anonymously because he wanted to experience the hotel exactly as an ordinary father might. He described how his daughter had been frightened, how security had escorted him outside, and how nobody had bothered to verify his identity. He then revealed the complaints Marcus had uncovered. The room became silent. Some managers looked down at their hands. Others shifted nervously. The silence answered his question more clearly than words. Richard tried to defend the staff, claiming Valerie had followed security procedures and that the complaints were exaggerated. Ethan listened patiently, then asked why those procedures seemed to apply only to certain guests. Richard had no convincing answer. Ethan turned toward Valerie and asked whether she believed a person's clothing determined their worth. She struggled to respond. The elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, finally stepped forward and described months of disrespect from management. Her voice trembled, but she continued. Other employees followed, sharing stories they had previously been too afraid to tell. Ethan realized the hotel needed accountability, not another excuse. Ethan announced that Valerie and Richard were being dismissed immediately, along with 2 managers who had repeatedly ignored employee complaints. He explained that firing them was not punishment for one embarrassing incident, but a consequence of creating an environment where humiliation had become normal. Several employees expected Ethan to punish everyone, but he surprised them by promising training, fair evaluations, and a confidential system for reporting abuse. He also ordered the hotel to compensate guests who had received discriminatory treatment. Luxury was never marble floors, expensive furniture, or wealthy customers. True luxury was dignity given freely to everyone, without exception. After the meeting, Ethan returned to the lobby with Mia. The same chandelier shone above them, but the atmosphere felt completely different. Mrs. Thompson approached Mia and offered her a small chocolate from the staff kitchen. Mia smiled and accepted it. Ethan watched the moment quietly, realizing that this simple kindness mattered more than the millions represented by his hotel. Marcus stood nearby, waiting for further instructions, but Ethan asked him to delay everything. He wanted to personally meet employees who had been ignored. Ethan listened without interrupting, determined to hear every employee completely and understand their concerns before deciding. That afternoon, Ethan made another unexpected decision. He reserved the hotel's finest suite for a family experiencing homelessness after a house fire, paying for their stay privately. He did not announce it to the press or allow anyone to photograph the family. Instead, he told the new management team that compassion should never become a marketing strategy. Mia watched her father arrange the details and finally understood why he had refused to reveal his wealth earlier. He wanted people to choose kindness without expecting a reward. The experience taught her something no school could have taught her about true success. Before leaving, Ethan stood in the lobby and addressed the remaining employees. He told them that mistakes could be forgiven when people admitted them, learned from them, and changed their behavior. What could not continue was cruelty protected by titles. He reminded everyone that a hotel existed to welcome people, not judge them. Several workers applauded softly, while others wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan thanked them for staying honest once they felt safe enough to speak. He then looked toward Mia, who was smiling proudly. For the first time, the Grand Meridian felt like the home he wanted most. Weeks later, the hotel began changing in ways guests could immediately notice. Employees received better training, managers were evaluated on how they treated their teams, and complaints were reviewed independently. Ethan still visited without announcing himself, sometimes wearing the same simple clothes that had once caused him to be rejected. The difference was remarkable. Staff members now greeted every guest warmly, whether they arrived in a luxury car or walked from a nearby bus stop. Valerie and Richard were gone, but their failure remained as a lesson. Ownership meant more than possessing a building, it meant protecting everyone inside itself. Mia never forgot the afternoon her father had been denied a room at his own hotel. Years later, she would remember it not as the day Ethan fired an entire leadership team, but as the day he showed her what wealth really meant. He could have humiliated everyone who embarrassed him, yet he chose reform instead. The Grand Meridian became known for exceptional service, but its greatest reputation came from treating every guest with equal dignity. Ethan remained wealthy beyond imagination, but he measured success differently. Whenever Mia asked what made him proudest, he remembered when kindness became true luxury.